Hello, Scream Demons. Welcome to the Screams from the Basement podcast with Sam and Casey. I am one of your co-hosts. I am Casey.
And I'm Sam. Let's get screaming.
And this episode, we have a guest on who is a teenage monster hunter. He journeyed with Elvira to the Haunted Hills, and he was even an assistant to Brian De Palma.
He's the director of the 1994 full moon sci-fi western Oblivion. Here to celebrate the film's 30th anniversary is director Sam Irvin. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hey, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. We're excited. 30 years. That's a big number. I just turned 30 this year, so this movie's as old as I am. So it feels exciting to talk about this. I share a birth year with Oblivion, but 30 years. Like, what does that feel like, Sam? Like, what does that number feel like?
It makes me feel very old. It's just absolutely crazy. It feels like I was on that set yesterday, and actually, I was on that set last year. Elvira and I took a tour group of 30 people to Romania to tour all the locations where we shot Elvira's Haunted Hills, but it's also where I shot Oblivion. And we took a side trip to the studio where we built the western town for Oblivion, which is still standing to this day. And it's at Castell Studios. And it's used in all kinds of movies. It's been used in countless things since we built it from scratch. We were the very first thing at Castell Studios. There was no Castell Studios when we got there. It was a cornfield. And we built this town from the ground up, designed the whole thing. And then the studio kept it. It became the centerpiece of their back lot, and they built up an entire major studio around it. And now there's sound stages, state-of-the-art everything, and major movies get shot there all the time. It's incredible.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that is so cool because that's the first thing I'd seen the Oblivion before, but rewatching it this time, I was like, wow, like the sets in this are just incredible, and to hear that they're 30 years later, they're still there. That's amazing.
It really is. It was. I mean, I literally cried when I was walking down this Oblivion street and going into the saloon and everything, and the. Vlad and Juana Panescu, who owned this property and owned the studio, are still there. And we all were, it was this huge reunion. We hadn't seen each other in 30 years, and it was just incredible. It was the most amazing time. And a guy named Bogdan, who was a production assistant on Oblivion, is now like the director of the studio. And it was just an incredible reunion.
That's awesome. Yeah, you for Oblivion, you put together a pretty great cast and crew. Not the least of which is Meg Foster, almost unrecognizable in that movie. It took me a second to realize it was her. Can you talk through the process of like working with Meg, the makeup appliances that are used in your movie, and just finding the character through that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, Meg Foster, I was a huge fan of hers anyway. I thought she was an incredible actress. At that time, I don't think she had done much in the way of genre films, but I was always taken with her eyes, those beautiful, light, crystal blue eyes that look like a Russian snow dog or something. It was just the most amazing eyes. And when her name came up as a possibility to play the cyborg deputy, I was like, oh my God, it's gonna look, her eyes are gonna look so otherworldly and robotic, or whatever, that she's not gonna need any contact lenses or anything. It's just gonna be incredible on its own. And so, yeah, I was so excited that she agreed to do it. And God, she was so perfect in that character. And honestly, she didn't need anything, as far as appliances or anything like that. Her eyes did it all. And of course, the costuming and everything was fantastic. And she got into the robotic movements and everything, and she's just such a consummate, brilliant actress that she worked all of those things out. And it was just fabulous. I love her to death.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
whole cast of this movie is truly incredible, especially
Isn't it?
you know
I'm so
we're
proud of it. It's like, whoa! When I first started working with Charlie Band, well, I'll tell you how it all happened. I had done my first feature film, Guilty as Charged, I with Rod Steiger and Isaac Hayes, who repeats in Oblivion. And then I did, and that movie was a dark thriller with some humor about a madman who kidnaps murderers and puts them in a dungeon and fries them on his own electric chair. and and so that film came out in '91, I think, and then I did a sort of a whodunit scream queen thriller called Acting on Impulse that had Nancy Allen, Linda Fiorentino, C. Thomas Howell, Isaac Hayes again,
Mhm.
and Zelda Rubinstein from Poltergeist, and who had also been in Guilty as Charged. Um, and again, just an amazing cast, but it also had Cassandra Peterson as a bouncer at a country western bar, and it had Brink Stevens as a waitress, and it had all these great cameos. Um, but at any rate, those two films, on the basis of those two films, I got a manager named Venetia Stevenson. Now, she had been an actress. She had been in Horror Hotel with Christopher Lee, and her dad directed Mary Poppins, and her mom was Anna Lee, who was in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane as the next door neighbor, and all kinds of great movies and stuff. So she was a real Hollywood sort of royalty kid, and she had become a manager, and she also managed Rennie Harlan and other directors, and she knew Charlie Band, and she wanted to introduce me to him. So we went in for a meeting, and Charlie had seen my two films and liked them a lot, and he started pitching Oblivion, and that they had in early stages of development, and they had some sketches of the different characters and everything, and I was just blown away by the whole idea. I thought this could be really something, and I could, all of the characters were so distinctively interesting and different. I just really wanted to get heavily involved in casting and figuring out, who would be perfect for these things. And there was, I mean, for instance, there was Kitty, the feline alien who runs the saloon. Well, immediately it popped into my head, we have to get Julie Newmar, who was the original
Yes.
Catwoman. And so I talked to Julie, and it was, I had no idea if she was going to be into it, if she would want to kind of have a nod to Catwoman, and how far we could go with that. And she said, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to do that, but I don't want to make it the same thing. We got to make it different." So originally, she was going to be in a black sort of cat suit, and she said, let's do it leopard. Let's make it, let's
Yeah.
take it a little different and make it different like that. And so she had, great ideas, and that's the direction we went in. But she still did, the perfect and all, in dialogue and stuff like that. And I was constantly encouraging her to do those kinds of things. And she was just absolutely amazing. And then, like the town drunk, I'm thinking, what do we do about that? And Doc Valentine, and it suddenly struck me, what about George Takei from Star
Yeah.
Trek? And so then I threw in, I threw in a bunch of Star Trek references. And my favorite is when he comes out of the bar drunk, and he's got a bottle. I gave him a bottle of Jim Beam, and we improvised this line where he goes, "Jim, beam me up," and takes a swig. And Peter David, who wrote the scripts, brilliant writer, very well known in fandom, and he was not necessarily too keen on these sort of campy, over the top humorous moments that I was injecting into the script. And he tried to talk me out of it, and I said, "No, we've got these incredible people. We've got to have these sort of meta inside joke references and stuff, and the fans are just going to eat it up." And And so begrudgingly, he let me. Well, I mean, it was really not his decision. I mean, it was, I was the director and all that. But he's sort of bit his tongue, and we did it. But years later, he came around and he said, you were right, and it is what people remember, and have fun with. And so, I think we made the right decision. Some people, it was a different style of humor and than what Full Moon was known for, I guess. And
Yeah.
I mean, I brought a little campiness to it. I'm gay, so I bring sort of a slightly different style of humor to things. And so it was a little different, and I don't think it did as well as Charlie was hoping in the beginning, and it didn't really connect with the fans that were sort of into all of the Full Moon stuff. But it's grown in its reputation over the years and developed much more of a cult following. And I wanted it to be released theatrically, of course. And there was no money for Charlie to release it. And I said, yeah, but just, make one 35 millimeter print. I'll book it. I'll get it booked into midnight shows in Los Angeles, and let's just see what happens. And I had previously in the 90s, I'd worked in marketing between working for De Palma and getting my first feature film off the ground. I did a short film, and I did it all on credit cards, and I had to get a regular job to pay for it. And so I worked in film marketing in New York, and I was head of marketing for United Artists Classics, and then Spectra Film, and then very briefly with Vestron. Anyway, so I knew the theater owners. I knew the Laemmle family that run all the Laemmle theaters here in Los Angeles. They're related to, Carl Laemmle of Universal, and who produced, all the Frankenstein, all the great classic horror movies.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of this cool connection. But I called up Greg Laemmle and I said, please, I need this film booked for midnight shows. And he said, sure, Sam, no problem. And so we got it into the Sunset 5 in West Hollywood. And there are these free magazines that are given out at gay bars. And the advertising rates are not very high. And so I just paid out of my own pocket a full page ad in each of those little freebie handouts in the neighborhood. And I convinced Julie Newmar, George Takei, and Carl Stryken, who played Gaunt. Now, Carl was Lurch in the Addams Family movies and The Giant on Twin Peaks and all that. And we'll talk about him in a minute. But I got the three of them to agree to come and appear at this screening. And oh my God, it was sold out instantly, and was huge. And we ended up doing it for like 2 or 3 more weekends after that. And I'm like, oh my God, this could be like the next Rocky Horror Picture Show, but it was really because we had, that star power there in person. I mean, as soon as we did 1 week without any of those guest stars, the grosses were not nearly quite as good. But but anyway, a lot of people got excited about it and everything. And then Charlie let me take it to film festival in Texas, the World Fest, and it ended up winning, best sci-fi film and all this stuff. And so I really felt like we had something that audiences were really getting into, and it could have maybe done as a theatrical release, but they just didn't have the apparatus or the money or anything. And so it ended up just going direct to video, which is basically what Charlie, does at that time, especially was doing with all of his films. But it was just a great ride. So yeah, I can't stop talking. You'll have to ask me another question.
No,
awesome.
my next question is a follow up to that. So what have you seen in the last 30 years of people now? Like, I feel like people talk about this movie as like that underrated gem of like, oh, like you like Full Moon movies, that you're already kind of in a weird subset of those type of movies. Have you watched Oblivion though? Like, have you seen people talking about this movie more and more and more in the last 30 years?
I definitely have, and it's definitely grown in popularity. And we started out, it was just going to be the one film, and I always felt like, oh, this can be a series of movies. It could also be a TV series.
Yeah.
It's the most incredible group of, ensemble of characters and everything. And I really wanted it to go in that direction. And as we were working on prep and budgeting and all this stuff, at that time, Charlie had a deal with Paramount, and he actually had some real money for a change, because he doesn't always have the luxury of much in terms of budget. So we actually had a little bit of money to play with, not a lot, but some. And by shooting in Romania, we were going to be able to afford to build, the Western town and everything,
Mhm.
because labor is very cheap in Romania, and we could afford to do things that we would never be able to afford to do here in America. So that was a huge advantage for us. But as we were budgeting, my grandiose plans of how big I wanted the town and how many buildings, how many facades and whatnot kept growing. And and then if we had this, and what if we had that? And Charlie came to me and said, "Hey, this is getting out of hand. We're going to have to, have to cut a third of the street down. It's just too much. We're not going to be able to afford to do all this." And so then I was a huge fan of the Three and Four Musketeers that Richard Lester had directed back in the 70s, partly because Christopher Lee was in it, but it's great films. And when they were shooting it, the script was very long, and they ended up dividing the film into two movies, and it got into a huge kerfuffle with the actors and Screen Actors Guild and everything, because they had agreed to do one film, and now suddenly it's two, and they had to make settlements with everybody. And it was produced by the Salkin brothers, and now there's a Salkin clause in contracts at SAG that is based on what happened with that movie when they divided it into two. And then they tried the same thing. They were the same producers on the first two Superman movies with Christopher Reeve, and they tried to do kind of the same thing, where they were going to shoot both movies together, and they actually shot a little bit of part two, but they were running out of money and time and everything else, and it kind of collapsed, and they had to get back into production. But they were trying to do the similar thing. But I took that idea, and I went to Charlie and I said, "Look, what if we did two Oblivion films? Then you could amortize the cost of building this set over the cost of two movies." And he said, "Sam, you're right. Let's do it." So we kept everything we wanted with the design of the town, and we went to Peter David, the screenwriter, and said, "How fast could you come up with the idea for another script?" And he said, "Well, I've already outlined another script. I mean, I was hoping there'd be a sequel. This is fantastic." Yeah. And he just dove right in. We read the treatment. It was great. And he just turned out that script in record time. And that's how we ended up making two movies at the same time. And they were, I always say they were shot back to back, but that sounds like you shoot one and then you shoot the next one. No, we shot it like one big long movie. If we were shooting the scenes in the saloon, we shot all the saloon scenes for both movies, and then we moved to the next set. And that's how it all, so it was really just one big movie that was divided into two. Although, it has a satisfying arc and everything at the end of the first one, and
Right.
kind of a new story in part two, where we bring in Maxwell Caulfield as a bounty hunter, and he's a new character that's only in part two, and that sort of thing. So they really stand up as individual movies. You don't have to, you don't have to see it as like a part one, part two, but they do work great together as well. Well, we shot, well, I should go back to casting. I mean, I should talk about Carl Stryken, who is Gaunt.
Yeah.
He was just freaking amazing. And the funniest thing, he's very tall. He's almost like 7 feet tall. And so they said, "Well, he's going to need a special bed at the hotel." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And he said, "Well, we'll build a custom bed." So we get there, and and I take Carl up to the room, and this bed is like 10 feet long, but only about 3 feet wide.
Oh my
And
god.
his shoulders are like hanging off the sides, and it's like, and he just kind of, Sam, it's okay. I'll just get me a king size bed and I'll sleep diagonally like I always do. So, so that's what we had to do. And but he was fantastic. And you know, you hear the term gentle giant. I mean, it so applies to Carl. He is the sweetest guy you could ever meet, and just so soft spoken, and I just love that guy to death. And saw him at a convention just last year, and we took a picture together again, and it was great to see him. I love him, and I also in aside from the two Oblivion films, he also appeared in my film Out There, which was a UFO comedy that I did in '95 for Showtime, where he also plays an undertaker. kind of typecast in my movies. Um, but he, you know, he had been Lurch in the Addams Family movies and the Giant on Twin Peaks, and just, you know, I just loved the idea of his size and tallness. And so, you know, I said, let's don't put a regular hat on him. Let's put an Abe Lincoln hat that's another foot taller.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I mean, with his costume, he probably would have fit great in that 10-foot bed because he was huge. And I think we even put lifts in his shoes. I mean, we just went crazy with his height. And the greatest idea that Peter David came up with for that character was to have him sort of have ESP, where he knew when people were going to die, and he would suddenly, out of nowhere, just show up to catch their body as it was, you know,
Mm-hmm.
on the way
Yeah.
down to the ground. And I just thought that was brilliant. And so whenever Gaunt shows up anywhere, everybody's always terrified that, okay, who's about to die. And
Yeah.
that was just a great concept. I really loved that. And then I brought in Isaac Hayes, my pal, who had been in a couple of my movies already, and did more with me after. And he played the bartender at the the cantina. He was fabulous. I have this. I did a cameo. Well, I did a cameo in both. In the first one, I'm in the stocks in the very beginning, in the opening
Yeah.
titles, when Red Eye comes into town, and I'm there, and he, obviously I'm some sort of criminal, and he, you know, breaks the lock so that I'm free, and I, you know, run away because he looked scary. And but I had a much better cameo in part two, in Backlash Oblivion 2, where I'm this badass cowboy. I mean, pretty, I guess, the same character. And we called him Stogie Joe. And I come into the cantina, which has now been taken over by Lash, who's Musetta Vander. We'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about her in a minute. And she's instituted a policy that it's a no smoking bar. And so I walk in, and I pull out a cigar, and my sidekick is about to light it, and Isaac Hayes behind the bar is like, "Oh!" and he points to the sign that says "No smoking," and I'm this badass, and I'm like, "Yeah, right. Like, I'm going to pay attention to those rules." And my sidekick lights it up, and I'm taking my first drag of the cigar, and then bam, I get shot in the back, and I go flopping down onto this table. And we cut to Lash, who's played by Musetta Vander, at a corner table with the smoking gun, and she just blows the smoke off of it and says, "Those things will kill you." And then we cut back to Isaac Hayes behind the bar, who has a piece of chalk, and he's making another notch, and you realize that there's like all these people that have been killed for smoking. It was so much fun to do that, and I got to actually have a squib that went off when I got shot, and so I got to experience what actors go through with squibs. I mean, and you know, I was of course terrified, and of course it was absolutely nothing. You barely felt it. I mean, you felt a little kick, but it didn't hurt or anything. But you know, just going through all of that was really fun. But I will tell you this: I don't smoke, and the one drag that I took on the cigar, I got completely ill. I was so woozy and out of it, and like the whole rest of the day, I was like, I don't know how I got through the day. It was crazy. It was that damn cigar. And then let's see who else. Well, Musetta Vander as Lash. My
Yeah.
God, she was just incredible, and I mean, so sexy, so beautiful, um, and she, you know, she wields this whip, and we're like, we got to get you some whipping lessons. And she said, I already have been looking into that, and I found the guy who trained Michelle Pfeiffer when she was preparing for Catwoman. And so she
Nice.
actually learned how to use the whip from that guy.
That's so
And
cool.
it was really cool. And I was so impressed that she had already, you know, already was working on that and wanted to make it as good as it could be. And just her dominatrix sort of leather ensemble was so beautifully designed. And um, we, you know, we had um, there was a guy named Radu Korchaba and his wife Juana, who worked on all of the costumes, but he was also a production designer, and he was helping Milo, who was the Full Moon production designer, who was working with me on designing the town in America before we even, you know, sent plans over there. And but Radu and his wife, when I came back a few years later to do Elvira's Haunted Hills, um, Radu became the lead production designer, and his wife helped with the costumes and everything. So there is that sort of crossover, because we made Elvira's Haunted Hills at Media Pro, which was the competing studio. So a lot of we didn't have too much crossover in terms of crew, but definitely the production designer and the work and the costume designer were the same. And but at any rate, Radu and his wife just did an amazing job with all of the costumes. And then let's see who else. I mean, we, you know, Richard Joseph Paul as our lead cowboy
Mhm.
was magnificent. He was so great, and he had been in Sex and the City as Sarah Jessica Parker's boyfriend for a couple of episodes, or an arc on that show, and had done a few things, and he just had great charisma. And then right after, in Romania, he became the lead on the Primevals, which just
Yeah.
finally came
Yep.
out after
Yep.
30 years. And by the way, um, I mentioned that Maxwell Caulfield came in for part two to play the bounty hunter. Well, his wife, Juliette Mills, was over there at you know, at times with us, and although she didn't appear in the Oblivion films, she became one of the leading characters, one of the leading actors in Primevals. So there are all these,
Wow.
there are a lot of connections to our film.
That's
Plus, we
so
had
neat.
stop motion animation,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and although David Allen was so busy with prepping Primevals that he wasn't directly involved, but his proteges and his staff were the ones that worked on the giant scorpion, and the, you know, and then also in the I did another full moon movie after these two called Magic Island. It was for the
Mhm.
Moonbeam label. They're sort of more family oriented, and we shot that in Mexico. But that also had a giant, a stone giant that was stop motion. But
Mm.
Joe Grossberg, who was sort of the one of the top proteges of David Allen, was the one who was the lead on all of those stop motion effects, and he just did a magnificent job with those. And I'm such a Ray Harryhausen, you know, monster kid.
Yeah.
Just the whole experience of being able to have some stop motion animation in my movies and do an homage to Harryhausen was a dream come true in and of itself. If it had just
Mhm.
been that, it would have been amazing. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was just incredible. God, I can't stop talking because there's just so much. But
No.
I loved working on that film so much. And by the way, Charlie was so trusting. I bowed down to him. He just let me go and do my thing. He never came and visited the set. He never interfered. Um, it was just, I couldn't believe it. It was so amazing. It was just amazing to have that trust, and I wanted to do the best job I absolutely could with it. And I think we made it look incredible. And
Hmm.
I don't know. I absolutely love it. I wish it could have gone on. I wish we could have done a third film. I wish it could have been a TV series, like I said, because I think it really would have worked. But
Was there ideas for a third one or a TV
yeah, I
series?
mean,
Because
Peter David had some other rough outlines. I can't recall after all these years what the storylines were about or anything. You should interview Peter, because I'm sure he
yeah,
would have
Yeah.
some cool things to talk about. But yeah, I would have just so loved to have gone on with it.
yeah, watching. So I watched Oblivion 2 for the first time for this because I had seen the first one, had never watched the second one, and I was like, oh my god, like I want to just keep going because it does feel like a TV series where
Yeah,
you're hanging out with people that you just love hanging out with, all these
yeah,
characters. Yeah. So
absolutely. And we just had so many cool people, Irwin Keyes, and and we have to talk about Andrew Divoff as Red Eye. My God,
Hmm.
yeah,
he was incredible. And the poor guy is under that mask where you can barely see him, but he just brings it to life, man. And he's such a powerful actor. And so I wanted to get his face in there somehow, and I think it's in Oblivion 2 where he comes in to trade in some draconium. You could correct me. It might have been in 1, but I think that scene is in part 2. And he plays another character, just this kind of crazy guy that comes in to trade in draconium. And Isaac Hayes, who's the bartender, also doubles as the banker, and he switches his visor and he comes over
yep.
to help him trade in his draconium. And Andrew just did this really funny little cameo with that character too. And then he went on to play Blackbeard in my Magic Island right after that. And there you do see his face the whole time, and he's just delicious as that character. I mean, he's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one piece of production design. I'm gonna let Sam Lenz talk about this because there's one piece that we were talking about off air that I know, Sam, you want to talk about.
Yeah, the very first thing that stood out to me about this movie are the outdoor ceiling fans on all the street lamps. I adore that detail.
Yeah.
It's my favorite thing. I loved it so much. What was the thought process behind that? What was the
We were, you have this Western town, and we were just trying to think of anything and everything to make it quirky and modern and anachronistic, but while keeping the sort of Western town flavor. And so, we had to have an ATM machine, and we had to have, and so we were just thinking, what could we put on these, on the telephone poles going up and down, and so somehow we came up with that idea. I honestly don't remember who said it, or if it was my idea or the production designer or somebody just said it off the cuff. But as soon I just embraced it. I was like, oh my god, that's so ridiculous. Of course.
yeah.
And so yeah, that was just one of those strange, quirky things that I was like, it makes absolutely no sense. And yes, we're gonna do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's super quirky, but also like adds to the world of like, oh, this is a Western town, but it's not not your traditional Western town
Yeah,
that we
it's a
know
little
from
off
actual
kilter.
Westerns. Yeah.
But also, what motivated it as well is that in that very first scene, when the credits are still rolling, where Red Eye comes into town, by him passing anything electrical because of the draconium that he has
Mm-hmm.
in his possession, it makes electrical things, blow out,
Short
or
out.
whatever.
Yeah.
And So there was the idea that, we needed something, and, it was daytime, so light bulbs, it isn't that impressive. But we felt like the fans, if suddenly these fans were stopping, that would be a much more visual way to express that aspect of it. So, these fans are stopping as, one by one as he goes down the street. Now, where that idea again, it's so long ago, I can't remember. I can't remember in the soup of who came up with what, but I was definitely thinking about working when I worked on The Fury with Brian De Palma. I played an extra in the amusement park scene when Andrew Stevens, who has telekinesis, was slowly walking through this amusement park, and with his telekinesis, he's fuming and furious, and and all of that energy is going out and making the rides in the amusement park go crazy. And so I was totally thinking of that as Red Eye was walking into town, and I wanted, things to visually, it wasn't going to be as spectacular as, like amusement park rides going crazy, but at least I wanted some movements to come to a stop and be able to spark and, and show all of that. So that's kind of where my head was at.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so great, and it again adds to the world so much. And there's one movie you brought up. You mentioned Primevals, which just got like this big release. Finally shot 30 years ago. It's finally coming out. Got this big special edition box release. Looks awesome. What's the status for Oblivion 1 and 2? Are those ever going to get a Blu-ray release? Do you know?
I have no idea, and I'm gonna strangle Charlie if he doesn't do it soon.
Yeah,
It's done, and I better get a call to do the audio commentaries.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, no, it so desperately needs to be done, and I don't know why it hasn't. There might be some rights issues, or I just don't know. I just don't know that side of it at all. But it just begs for being released together, and it seems like after all these years, it's just so long overdue. But let me also talk about it just brought to mind that the other thing that was so incredible is that when it came time to do the score for Oblivion 1, I was like, what are we going to be able to afford to do? Gosh, it would be so cool if we could have an acoustic, recorded score with an orchestra and everything. And then I suddenly remembered that Charlie had worked with Pino Donaggio when he was at Empire. And I knew Pino from my De Palma days because he had done Dress to Kill and Home Movies, which I associate produced. And he he doesn't know English. I could never really communicate with him. I can't say I was his buddy. He always had a translator with him and stuff, and I was just like a fly on the wall. But I had been in his presence, the presence of royalty, and I loved that guy, and I loved the scores that he did. And so I said to Charlie, I said, what about if we got Pino? And he was like, well, let me call him and see. So and it worked out, and Pino did this incredible score. And we didn't have the money to fly him into the U.S., and so it was all done long distance. We talked on the phone with translators, and we went through the spotting session and everything. But he came up with that incredible score and recorded it in Italy, and with a full orchestra and everything. And it was just magnificent. It was the coolest sort of homage to Ennio Morricone and everything. I mean, it was just an amazing score. And so then we didn't edit part 2 right away because Charlie needed part 1, and he was going to release that and then hold back on part 2 for a year or two and come out with it later. And I went off to direct Magic Island, and so was very busy on that. And then when we got back from Mexico, and I edited Magic Island to get that all ready for release, that was right around the time that Charlie's deal with Paramount went south. And again, I don't know any of the gossip of what was going on. I just know that suddenly there was no money. And so I wanted Pino to do the score for Magic Island as well. But Charlie was like, nope, the money has gone away. We can't do it. So I'm going to have my brother do the score for Magic Island. And his brother is a great composer, and I love his stuff. But he's a one-man show with his garage synthesizers and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew it was going to have a not that full-bodied orchestral sound, but he did a great job with Magic Island score. I loved it. And but then we finally got around to editing part 2 of Oblivion. And Charlie's brother, his name is escaping me. You must know it.
Oh yeah, Richard. Yeah.
Richard, thank you.
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
Richard Band. Jesus. Yeah, this is just a brain fart at my age. Anyway, Richard. So Charlie said, yeah, we're not going to be able to afford Pino again, so Richard's going to do the score to Oblivion too. Now, no, I'm not casting any aspersions against Richard, who is a great composer and would have done a lovely job. But I remembered on the 3 and 4 Musketeers, a similar thing happened. They had Michel Legrand do the score to the first one, and they didn't get around to editing the second one until later. And by the time they got to that, Michel Legrand was not available, and they got Lalo Schifrin to do the score to the second one. Now, Lalo Schifrin is a magnificent composer, most known for the Mission Impossible theme that everybody knows. And his score to it was totally legit, but all the themes and everything that Michel Legrand had developed for each character and everything in the first one was completely non-existent in the second one. And I was furious as a kid. I just thought that was the dumbest mistake ever. It would be like, doing a James Bond film and suddenly having Man from U.N.C.L.E. music or something. It just didn't, it just didn't make sense to me. And so I was begging Charlie. I said, please, we've got to get Pino again, because it's got to have that continuity with the score. And it was like, nope, there's just no money. Well, I put together a temp score using all of Pino's cues from the first movie. And it originally started out that I was just, I was going to hand over this temp score to Richard Band and just said, do your best to sort of evoke some of the ideas of it a little bit. And but the deeper I got into it, I was so married, and this happens with directors all the time. They get married to their temp score. And boy, was I married to that temp score. And I started perfecting it with the editor and making, every music edit we smoothed out and made perfect. And so we finally, when we screened the director's cut with this amazing score to Charlie, I just said, Charlie, let's just reuse the score from the first one. It's already cut together. It's already there. And he agreed. So what you're hearing is a recycled score from the first one. But there's actually a couple of cues that we ended up not using in the first one that are used in the second one. So there is some quote unquote new music a little bit here and there in the second one.
That's so cool.
But anyway, that's how that all happened, and it was only because I couldn't imagine it without Pino's themes. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, because the continuity between the two is just absolutely, it's perfect, and that music is 100% a big part of that.
It really is. It really is.
I want to jump to, we got two other works of yours we want to talk about before we let you go. I know one of them, Sam, you're dying to talk about. I'll let you jump in here.
So Elvira has always been my favorite horror host from very early age. I love her. I love her movies. Um, you directed Elvira's Haunted Hills, which is riffing on another favorite subgenre of mine, which is, you know, the Poe Corman movies
Yes.
from the like
Mhm.
50s and 60s.
Yep.
Can you just talk about working with Elvira and what it was like working on that film together? Because it's
Well,
one of my favorites. I
Yeah.
love it.
yeah, I mean, between the Oblivion films and Elvira's Haunted Hills, I mean, those were the films that I had the most fun as a fanboy doing. I mean, hands down. I've done over 50 films now, and I always cite those as my favorites in terms of just the satisfaction that I got from being able to create everything from the ground up and everything. Well, I was a huge fan of Elvira in the 80s, and especially after I saw the first Elvira movie, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and everything. And when I moved to Los Angeles to do Guilty as Charged, my first film in 91, shortly after that, after it had opened, I went to a party. I was friends with Terry Sweeney, who was the first openly gay cast member of Saturday Night Live. He was in the cast in '85, and he was famous for doing Nancy Reagan in drag. and and his boyfriend Lanier Laney, they're married now, and they're writing partners, and they were writers on Saturday Night Live for years. But Terry was only one of the cast members for just a year or maybe two. Um, and then they moved to LA, and they became head writers on Man TV for many, many years.
Mhm.
Anyway, they knew every comic, you know, every comedian, every, you know, Saturday Night Live people, Groundlings, Second City, you name it. Well, Terry and Lanier invited me to come to a party. And at this party, I saw Cassandra Peterson sitting over in a corner. And I ran over to Terry and I said, you have to introduce me to Cassandra. I'm such a fan. And so he took me over there, and and I was just totally like fanboying out, telling her how much I loved her first movie and all this stuff. And then Terry said to her, well, Sam just directed his first feature. It was called Guilty as Charged. And she went, I just saw that movie and I loved it. And in fact, if I ever get around to doing another Elvira movie, I want to consider you as a possible director for it.
Oh my
and,
God, that's awesome.
and I was like, what? So I just thought, well, she's had too much to drink, or this is what happens at Hollywood parties, but that's not going to work out. But anyway, it was very flattering. Thank you. So then about a year later, I do my second film, acting on impulse. And I got her to play this bouncer at a country western bar. It wasn't as Elvira. She wore a blonde wig and did a whole sort of Dolly Parton kind of thing. It was very funny. And so we became friends, and she started inviting me to her parties. She did a pilot for CBS of the Elvira show, and invited me to the taping of that. It was in front of a live audience, kind of three camera sitcom sort of thing. And so we were just in touch. And but years went by, and because I met her, it was 91 probably, but then it was like 98 or 99. I get this call from her, and she said, we have tried to get another Elvira film going with every place in town and been turned down by everybody. So my husband and I have decided we're financing it ourselves. And I always told you I wanted to consider you as a director, and we're interviewing directors. So will you come up to our house and let's have a meeting? So I went up there, and she hands me the script to Elvira's Haunted Tales and goes, now this is a spoof of the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe, Roger Corman movies. Are you familiar with those? And I go, Cassandra. Vincent Price's monologue at the end of Pit and the Pendulum. Do you know where you are, Bartolome? You are about to enter hell. Hell, the netherworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned, a place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor of destiny, thus the condition of man bound on an island from which he can never hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell which must destroy him finally. And she looked at me and cocked her head like I was crazy and said, you're hired. And that's literally how I got the job. Now, why did I know that? monologue. Okay, in junior high school, I grew up in Nashville, North Carolina, and the teacher assigned us to learn monologues as an assignment. And, she was thinking like Shakespeare. Well, I don't like Shakespeare. I'm allergic to iambic pentameter. And I was like, no way I'm doing that. So I said, hello, could I do Edgar Allan Poe? And because I figured that sounded academic. And the teacher said, okay, I suppose so. So I raced home. Now, this is back in the 60s, long before home video or anything like that. But I recorded the audio of horror movies off of television speaker with a reel-to-reel tape recorder. This is before cassettes. And I had Pit and the Pendulum on the audio. So I went through and I transcribed back and forth, that monologue, and just the process of transcribing it, pretty much I memorized it just through that process, basically. And it really stuck with me, obviously, all these years. And so I went in the next day, and of course it wasn't Edgar Allan Poe, it was words. It was Richard Matheson, the great writer. But I wasn't about to tell the teacher that. And the teacher either figured out what I was up to and looked the other way, or just didn't know. And then I got an A. So anyway, so then in 1970, I was 14. I got my mother to drive me from Nashville, North Carolina to Atlanta, Georgia to see a production of Oliver, in which Vincent Price was playing Fagin. And we went to the stage door afterwards, and I got to meet my idol for the first time. And I told him that I knew his monologue from and he was like, no, you don't. And I'm like, yes, I do. And I did it for him. And there was a line of fans waiting, and I got a big applause after I did it. And he was absolutely astonished. And I had also, my dad owned movie theaters, and I had booked a kiddie matinee series on Saturday mornings of a Vincent Price festival, and I had a flyer that I had designed and made for that, and I showed him that, and he was incredibly impressed with that. And my name, Sam Irvin, also made an impression on him, because back in those days, it was Watergate and everything was going on. There was a famous senator, Sam Irvin, who also happened to be from North Carolina, who was the head of the Watergate Committee and was kind of really well known. He spelled it differently than my name, but pronounced the same. It was Ervin, and I'm Irvin. But when I said my name, without him seeing it written out, he said, oh, you must be related to the Senator Sam Irvin. And I'm like, well, no. And I explained it. But all of those things, he remembered me. A year later, I went to a lecture tour at a college. Again, I was too young to even drive, so I got my mother to take me, and went backstage again. And he went, Sam, what are you doing here? Because he immediately associated me with the senator. And then he, like I was his, little performing monkey. He said, to the people in line, he said, this young man knows my monologue from Pit and Pendulum. And he asked me to perform it for everybody. So then in 1974, as a graduation present from high school, I get my parents to send me to London so I can interview all my horror film idols like Christopher Lee and everybody for my fanzine that I'm doing then on horror films called Bizarre. So I go to London, and Christopher Lee has me come and visit him on the set of Man with the Golden Gun, and I spend the day with him. And he gives me a tour of all the Bond sets and everything else. And I ride back to London from Pinewood Studios with Christopher Lee and Hervé Villechaize, and Hervé Villechaize is drunk. And I mean, it's just the most amazing day you could ever imagine on the history of the planet. And you would think, oh, that would be enough for a kid for one day. No, I decided that night I was going to go see Pygmalion on the West End, because Diana Rigg was playing Eliza Doolittle, and I was a huge Diana Rigg fan, from Emma Peel in The Avengers, from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where she was the best Bond girl in all history. Yeah. And but mainly because she was the daughter of Vincent Price in Theater of Blood. And so, and I hadn't been able to get in touch with her ahead of time. And so I was going to go to the stage door after and try to get her autograph and try to convince her to do an interview for my fanzine. Well, I take my seat, and before the curtain goes up, I hear this very familiar laugh right behind me, and I turn around, and it's frickin' Vincent Price. And before I can open my mouth, he goes, "Sam, what are you doing here?" And then I explained what's going on, and he said, "Oh, well, you're coming backstage with us afterwards. And by the way, I'll introduce you to my fiancée, Coral Brown, who was this great British actress who had been in Theater of Blood, where they had met and fallen in love, and um, and and it was actually Diana Rigg who had introduced them before shooting on Theater of Blood, and so they were great friends with Diana. Anyway, we go backstage afterwards, and Vincent Price has me do my monologue for Diana Rigg. So that monologue I've gotten so much mileage out of that, including on this podcast. It's just the gift that keeps on giving.
That's
awesome.
so amazing, Sam, and
Yeah.
it's so amazing to hear your stories. Like I have one more question, because I don't know this story on how this next question happened, because you now took a turn this past year, just released in The Great Nick D. You took an acting turn in front of the camera to play casting agent Vince Lionheart. Great name for a character.
Named after Vincent and his character in Theater of Blood, Edward
Yeah.
Lionheart.
Yeah.
It's all full circle. It
how
all
did that
interconnects. Everything connects in my life.
Yeah. How did that happen? How did you get involved with that project?
Well, I'm great friends with Ansel Faraj, who co-directed and co-wrote it, and has done a lot of films, all of which have Dark Shadows alumni in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a huge Dark Shadows fan. I mean, I watched that series first run every day. I'd run home from school. So, and anyway, there's all kinds of interesting connections with Dark Shadows, which you'll have to read in my book, I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter.
Yes.
Anyway, so I become friends with Ansel, and I'm trying to think, I guess just through social media or whatever. And then he started inviting me to his cast and crew screenings, and to a couple of his earlier films, especially like Todd Tarantula. I got to meet at the theater. I got to meet David Selby and Catherine Lee Scott, and that kind of thing. And then he was writing these things online on his social media pages, where he would take like a year, random year, like 1953, and he would go through all the cool horror films that had come out that year and talk about the trends and stuff. And I was like, Ansel, you need to be doing this in a magazine. You really should do something. And it actually led to him creating a column for We Belong Dead magazine, the UK publication that Eric McNaughton publishes. And I know those guys, and Daryl Buxton, who's the editor and stuff, and they're the nicest people. And when Ansel was getting ready to do that column, the name of it was kind of boring, and I said, no, you need a really much cooler name. And I really prodded him and made him come up with a cool name, and now it's escaping me what it is, but it's some kind of psychotronic something that is has a little more flavor to it. And so we just became pals. And so he just approached me out of the blue and said, would you consider playing a cameo part in my upcoming film? And I was like, yes, I don't care what it is we have to do. I would love to do that. I've always kind of put myself in these little Hitchcock very brief sort of characters in some of my films, like in Oblivion, but never really had dialogue. I mean, I might have said hello or one line or something, but I never really had an actual scene with dialogue. And so this was going to be a whole new experience, and I was so excited about it. It was the coolest thing. The name of the character, I forget what he called it originally, but I recommended the Vince Lionheart. I thought he might have already called it Vince. I think he was already, thinking in terms of that, of having some kind of Easter egg connection to the character name, and was already thinking along the lines of Vincent Price, because he knows how much I adore him, and what I didn't mention is we became very, very, very close friends throughout his whole life. But yeah, I just said, let's do the first name after Vincent, and then let's do Lionheart from the other thing. And he's like, oh, that's perfect. And I also try it in a lot of my films, when it's organic, I don't try to shoehorn it if it's not going to work. But I like to sneak into the dialogue "Guilty as Charged," which was the title of my first film. And so it's just a thing that I try to throw in there. So I said, if it works out in the dialogue, it'd be kind of cool if I could say "guilty as charged." That would be a cool thing. And we did. And so that's in there as well. And so yeah, I just played this sort of haughty casting director at the climax of the movie, where Nick Dick, who's trying to transition from a former career in porn films to legitimate films, to try to be a legitimate actor, so that he can win his girlfriend back, who won't have him when he's associated with the porn world. So this is very important to him, to land a legitimate role in a legitimate movie. And he comes in, audition for me, and I don't want to give away too much, but I like, have you been in here before? And then I sort of recognize him, and then I'm suddenly, wait a minute, you're Nick Dick. And anyway, it's just there's a little bit of humor in the scene, but it's also and the whole movie's a comedy, but it becomes a very dramatic scene, because he really puts, the character of Nick D puts his heart and soul into this audition. And, I don't want to spoil it, and it's just one scene. So, but I'm absolutely thrilled to have done it. And it really kind of lit a fire. I'd love to do more. Anyone listening out there, I'm available. And a director, Dean Foy in London, got in touch with me through social media when I was promoting all this stuff, and he said, I'm doing a film called Frankenstein. It's a short film, but it's going to be part of a of a feature film where there's 3 stories, and I'd like you to be in this one called Frankenstein, where this young descendant of Frankenstein, and the family's changed the name because of the little bit of reputation issues, and he makes a pact with the devil. And where does he find the devil? On his laptop. And he wants me to play Lucifer on the screen of the laptop, and they have quite a bit of dialogue. And so I said, yes, that is a juicy role. I would love to do that. And he said, well, because it's just going to be on the laptop, you can direct yourself and do it in LA, and and then just send us the thing, and we can rehearse it over Zoom or whatever. And I said, yeah, but I'm coming over to London for Dark Fest. They're having me as a guest in last November. Why don't I want to be directed?
Yeah.
And so why don't we shoot it while I'm there? And so that's what we did. So I've already done another cameo, I guess, in another film, and we'll see where it all leads.
Oh my God, that's
awesome.
That is so awesome. That is so awesome.
Cool.
Yeah,
love that.
So many great stories, Sam, and we could talk for hours and hours and hours.
I know.
There's so many things we haven't even dove into in your career and your life. But again, thank you so much for taking time out to talk with us. I have one more question we always leave everybody off with. Again,
yes.
30th anniversary, Oblivion. We love our double features. I'm sure you love your double features too. So if someone's going to watch Oblivion and watch something right after, not named Oblivion 2 because that's the obvious answer.
Damn it, you took away my answer.
That's the obvious answer. Maybe we can make it a triple feature, Oblivion 1 and 2, and then what movie would you pair with Oblivion though?
That's a very good question. I mean, if it was going to be one of my own movies, I would say Elvira's Haunted Hills because of the Romania connection and some of the crossover of the production designer and stuff. That would be cool. But if it was going to be in that sort of genre, I mean, either the original Westworld or Valley of Guanji, which was sort of a Western that had Ray Harryhausen dinosaurs in it and stuff. So, I was very much inspired by those films when I was making Oblivion. And but I would pick one of those.
That's awesome.
That is so awesome. Yeah.
Great picks. Yeah.
Great double feature. It needs to happen now in my house. But Sam, thank you again. If people want to follow you online and see where you end up as Lucifer in this upcoming movie, where can they follow you online?
I'm on Facebook, just Sam Irvin. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. And then on Instagram, it's Sam_Irvin_director. But Facebook is my wheelhouse because as you can see, I talk a lot. I also write a lot, and my posts are too long for Instagram. So if you want to see the unedited, longer versions of my posts, you'll have to check me out on Facebook. And if I can plug myself a little bit, I just want to tell people that I have some books out that I'm very proud about, that are available on Amazon. This is I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter, How I Met Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and more. And this is a collection of the 35 interviews that I did with horror film royalty back in the 70s when I was doing my fanzine Bazaar. But it's also coming of age memoir where I talk about how I bamboozled each of these interviews and how I became a monster kid and all that kind of stuff. And this takes everything up to the age of 19. My next book is sort of that I'm working on right now is sort of part 2, which will be my diploma years. So that's something to look forward to. And I also, and by the way, I'm so proud, I won the Rondo Award for Writer of the Year for this. And
that's awesome. Congratulations.
And then I, this year, won the Rondo Award again for the second year running for Writer of the Year for my latest book, which is the epic saga behind Frankenstein, the True Story. And this is a favorite mini-series of mine of Frankenstein. It's called Frankenstein, the True Story, 1973 on NBC, 2 parts, all-star cast, James Mason, Jane Seymour, David McCallum, Leonard Whiting, Agnes Moorehead, Sir Ralph Richardson, Sir John Gielgud, all these incredible people. Tom Baker from before Doctor Who. Anyway, it's the most amazing film, and Michael Sarrazin plays the creature who, in this version, starts out beautiful, which was an amazing innovation by the writers, the gay couple, Christopher Isherwood and Don McCarty. And then the monster starts to deteriorate after that. And it was just an amazing film. Well, I got Anne Rice, before she passed away, to write the foreword because it was the movie that inspired her to write Interview with the Vampire, which completely launched her whole career as a writer.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And for the afterword, I'm so proud, I got Guillermo del Toro to write the afterword. And it's also a film that he is totally inspired by. And he's actually making his own Frankenstein film right now in production. And so I'm really, I'm very, very proud of this book. It's only 400 pages and 1,300 photos. Just this mild obsession of mine. And But both of these books are available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and audiobook. The audiobooks are amazing because I get a lot of the interviewees to come and record their answers and stuff, so they're guest stars. Anyway, I'm just very proud of both of those.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you should be proud of those because those are some amazing stories. I dug into. I was a teenage monster hunter, and I was just like, "This is amazing. We have to talk to Sam in person on the show," and we did. And so happy to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me be a huckster and salesman.
Thanks for tuning in to the Screens from the Basement podcast with Sam and Casey.
Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and if you want the video portion, you can subscribe to us on YouTube as well.
Pick up exclusive Screams from the Basement merch, including shirts, hats, totes, and so much more on our TeePublic store.
You can use our Fangoria affiliate link for all of your Fango needs. You can use that to buy any magazines, t-shirts, and anything else Fangoria related on their website. Please visit shop.fangoria.com/screensfromthebasement and use promo code SCREEMSFROMTHEBASEMENT to save yourself 20%. And thanks for tuning in.
And sweet screams.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.